Hello there, interwebs, both YouTube and Twitch. Today we're going to be serving up the conclusion to our Elite Dangerous Design versus Delivery, and we're going to be talking about factions and their interaction with the background sim and the newsfeed. And I don't think that this system is necessarily bad, as much as it is the way that it is presented to the players is horrible. I don't think that the design itself is necessarily horrendous. A lot of people have beat them over the head over poor design. There's some aspects of the design I don't like. It's been the implementation that most people have had an issue with, and see my previous videos about this as well. I've gone in this in great detail. They talk about who runs the system, and then the wealth, standard of living, development level, security, and population are all statistics that affect the next ticks and what's going on in the background sim, but they don't give us this information. If this information was presented to us in numerical form, whether that number is between 1 and 100, 1 and 10, 1 and 1,000, 1 and 10,000, I don't think matters so much. But if it was given to us as either, at the very least, a bar graph, which it has. Now, a reminder here. When the game first released, all we got was a thumbs up and a thumbs down. We had no idea how much of a thumbs up versus a thumbs down our impact or our mission, taking missions, doing missions, were having on an impact on the system influence. Eventually, they did go back and overhaul the UI after the first year and started to give us information such as whether or not a mission would impact a influence, whether it's no pluses, influence plus, plus plus, plus plus plus. Same thing with your reputation and how that mission will impact the background sim. So they've given us a little bit of information there. They've also given us a bar graph when it comes to influence and how that mission has affected things and your reputation and all of that. That's all fine, well, and dandy, but what's really needed for something like this is a line graph to show us where the numbers are and how they've been trending over time. And if they didn't want to keep data long-term, at least show us what's been going on over the past 24 hours, 72 hours, and maybe even the past week or month. Maybe we don't need to know all of the information in the history of that system since the launch of the game, but certainly over the last 30 days would be very, very useful with this type of information so that we could see exactly how much our influence is having over a particular minor faction in the game, or our activities are influencing these various aspects. And it would make some of the system states and other elements of the background sim, I think, develop more meaning for players, as well as having just more logical sense of what the hell's going on. And I will caveat this with saying that I am not an expert in the background sim. Although I know you're going to watch this, let me know where I go wrong or if I go wrong on any of these informations. And I think that some of these things do have an impact, like the security rating of a system does have an impact on what ships you'll see being used as system authority vessels. I don't know that for sure, but I believe that these are taken into account. Now, the government types, that's all there, and they all have their own specific, unique impacts on the game world. In fact, there was a player group based out of Eastern Europe, Russia, that was trying to flip as many systems as they could over to communist, because they could. And, that does have an impact on what is allowed, what isn't allowed, prices, and other elements in the economic sense of the game, and stuff like that. So, to say that it has no impact on the game itself would be a lie, but whether or not that impact is meaningful in any way, shape, or form, the fact that there's no mechanics in the game right now that causes me to really give two shits about any minor faction in the game, well, there's your problem. And a large part of it is because I really have no way of seeing my impact or my player group's impact on these various aspects. If we were allowed to peek behind that curtain a little bit, as well as they turn a light on behind there so that we can see the various people, because right now as it stands with what we had somebody looking in there and giving us a thumbs up and thumbs down. They now open the curtain a little bit. We can stick our head in. We have a little bit of light shining in from behind us that allows us to see a couple of feet in and to basically what's going on. You can kind of see the scene shifting behind the scene or behind the curtain, getting ready for that next stage or that next scene. It would be very much nicer if they turned on a light so we could see exactly what's being moved into place and how, to give us a better idea of what's exactly going on as the play continues. Major economy types, yep, that's all there. System authority owned assets, basically which minor faction controls a station. Minor factions that aren't in control of the system can own other stations and planetary outposts and stuff like that. Neighboring authorities. I think that this is taken into account, in particular when you're in an expansion or retreat. But again, I would like to see this information spelled out. I would like to know if I'm in the Lave system and supporting the Workers' Party of Lave, that the Aurare Jet Company isn't trying to make a move in on the Lave system. I think that this could be an interesting element for being used in news articles and some other information. At the very least, give me the freaking statistics that tell me this information, that how are things being, or whom are we being compared against. And then entry logs, the faction relationship between two system authorities. This is based on player activity and statistics. Faction behind a system authority determines the laws of the system. Yes, whoever's the controlling faction, whether they're communist versus a theocracy versus a democracy, and how that impacts whether they're federal aligned, imperial aligned, alliance aligned. If an imperial subfaction takes over control of a system, you'll start to be seeing imperial slaves being offered, and then this can also be affected at a higher level, even with power play influencing this a little bit as well, which I think is stupid. Instead of power play being these sub-factions to major powers, they should have been you pledge to a minor faction, but that's a topic for other videos. Happens in a system each tick. I think this is once a day, the daily tick. It may happen 4 times a day. It may happen every week. I'm not sure. Statuses, and they give the example of the famine. In order for famine to happen, the following conditions must be met. Population stat must be 9 or more. Well, you don't show me the population stat. This is meaningless to me. Does that mean the population must be 900? Must it be 1,000? Must it be 10,000? Must it be 10 million? Standard of living must be under 3. Well, again, I have no idea what the standard of living is in a system at any given time, let alone what's the trend been over the past day, 2 days, week, what have you. And then agricultural assets must be fewer than residential assets. Again, nowhere does this information or is this information provided to me. If this information was provided to me as a series of line graphs over time, it would be a lot more interesting. It would cause me to actually start to give a damn as I could see what's going on, and it would also be nice to see what type of materials would have an impact. Now, this definitely does play an impact on the type of missions generated. A system that is in famine or near famine, you'll start to see bring us food supplies, grains, and type of missions like that, as well as donation missions once the famine actually triggers. That being said, I would like it to be where if agricultural assets are a problem, that even engaging in bulk trading, bringing in food cartridges, and of course demand and price should go up for those, as well as bringing in grain and other food items, fish, whatnot, should have an impact on increasing those overall agricultural assets over time, along with engagement of maybe other players. If it's a higher population system, and this does play out, you can have a much more impact as a player on a system with 1,500 people than a system with 15 billion people. That being said, if a group of players are working together with a smaller population system, that they should be able to have a noticeable impact and be given the statistics of exactly how their impact is doing with that system. If we were given this information and coupled with other elements of gameplay that have been alluded to here that have not been implemented, you could cause me to turn around from just going around and wandering as an aimless nomad to adopting a player group or starting my own that would try to control a system. I also think that in order for this to be meaningfully engageable by players and player groups, you'd also have to enable a fail state to where if a system or a faction is only located in one system and has been at 0% influence for, 3 meta ticks, that minor faction is therefore removed from the game. Again, the game does not allow for failure, at least not to the extent that I see. Instead, you have this Keynesian actor in terms of NPCs popping up that will basically step in as a floor, and those minor factions cannot be removed from their home system. I think that they should be able to be wiped out. I know that I'm probably get some pushback that people be like, but then we would see Eve-like interactions. Well, maybe, but not directly, because again, in order to engage in this type of warfare, it is an exercise in herding cats. This can be done in private group solo mode as well as in open, which again, we can go over those design issues and problems that have been there from the very beginning, but that ain't changing. It never is going to change. Accept it, live with it, move on. And instead, you have this indirect action tipping of the balance of the scales, which, in terms of being able or having instances where it's not one single persistent universe, I'm okay with that, and that's the way it would have to be. I personally have spent very many hours in the shower thoughts about this, of how would I improve this over the course of the past couple of years. I can't think of a better system than what they've implemented, given the design limitations and restrictions by a peer-to-peer networking and the game's design with multiple modes and now multiple platforms as well, being engaged and inhabiting one single solitary universe or having an impact on the same universe. So, given all of those factors, I think that the way that they designed it with the tipping of the scales is the way that you'd have to do that. That's just kind of my opinion. So causes are themed missions and events that occur whenever the ticks. So, if things are in system or in famine, could have two associated causes. Exodus, where people are generally attempting to leave the system, and food drive, where people are making extra concerted efforts to obtain food. And this does happen a little bit. I think that it would be cool to see this a little bit more on the passenger side of things, and maybe it is there. I've just never noticed it, because I was paying attention more to where people were going and how much they were paying versus their actual flavor text behind them. But again, if we were to look back on my video when I was discussing a game mode that I would propose for end-game players to engage in called colonization, that if you found a system in famine, that it would generate colonist missions. Colonists don't care where you take them, just so long as there isn't here and it is a better offer. Now, couple that with the ability of you take into an imperial-aligned system, or a criminal-aligned system, rather, and you could sell them into slavery, there could be some interesting dynamics there, and then that could have an all-impact on the background simulation for that system. And if all of this information was presented in a reasonable, easy way to digest, and again, I've done lots of videos over this over the course of the past year, wow, I think that that would be enough to cause me to say, I want to join a player group again and try to impact the background simulation, because I think that that would be more interesting and engaging dynamic, to borrow a word from Allo here, emergent gameplay that could happen. And I think he would agree with me on that, or she. Sorry, I don't mean to assume gender, but I would say that the statistics would say he rather than she. At any rate, resolving statuses. As players perform actions in the system, yeah, okay, that happens. So that pretty much is going. Outgoing effects. When they say creation, destruction, and alteration of system asset, I think what they're talking about were things like seeking luxury, seeking weapons. I think those still do exist in the game, although because it was being abused as the quince of its day, they shut it down. And again, this is kind of another one of those elements of, instead of going back and trying to fix it, they just eliminated it from the game and really have never gone back and added it back, I believe. But they were supposed to be seeking food, seeking luxuries, and things like that pop up. That does happen with conflict zones and the states of civil war and war, respectively. And it does change government types. It does change factional relationships. You can flip a system from being imperial aligned to federation aligned through the minor factions. Now, how this interacts with power play being superimposed on top of that, frankly, doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Isn't as stupid, but that's topics for other videos that I've touched on before. Now we're talking about news feeds and statuses here. And I just want to touch on this for a second, because this has been largely implemented. But if we go down here to their goals, and it's to provide players with useful and relevant information about the game world, present that information in a varied and interesting fashion, immerse the player in the game world. The problem is it fails on all of these aspects. Now, be extensible to allow for future content and features as the game develops. I think they've succeeded as far as that goes. But essentially what they're talking to is news stories. And if you go into the system and dock at a station, you'll see underneath there's information about the system in the form of news station or newspapers. And each one of those newspapers represents the views of a different faction, usually within that system, and tell you what's kind of going on in a very general roundabout way. And again, the problem here is we're telling people in a 1984 tell instead of show, where text was something that you could put into memory pretty easily and graphics weren't there. Well, video games have evolved over the past 30 years and we're now in a show instead of tell. And maybe you could combine these to make it a more interesting article system. Combine these articles with the graphs that I've been talking about to show how various aspects of this faction have been governed over the course of the past 72 hours, 24 hours, and what has led to the current events in that system or that faction state as it currently exists. And again, provide that information at a macro level, what's going on in the system as a whole, as well as individual factions within that system. I don't believe that as it's presented today that it is very useful and it is very relevant, because the fact that most players never click on it. I very rarely have, even when this newsfeed took up the entire right side of the station menu. I had very little reason to ever go through and read this information. To this day, I still have very little reason to go through and read this information. If it was presented with some of this information in a more easily digestible graphical form, I think that it would cause people to have a moment to look over this information and again, maybe want to become more engaged with the background simulation. I know it certainly would do it for me, but as it stands right now, with the fact that everything just resets as far as that goes every day, it just doesn't feel like I'm having that impact. But the idea would be that, let's say that the status is aware of mineral resources, cause mineral resources, or secure mineral resource. And it would create this story. You know, the Federal Democracy of Seoul plans to acquire gold resources. A recent discovery by Schoonometrics has urged the federal government to move to secure the gold-rich asteroid field at Alpha Centauri 3, asteroid cluster 3. Just throwing it out. I don't even know if that is an asteroid cluster. At any rate, for official government use. If successful, they will put an end to the unofficial mining operations that have been taking advantage of the mining opportunities and secure the Federation or the resources for the Federation. And a statement, spokesman Johanna said, "We will be sending security forces to the area to ensure that it is safe while our construction crews begin work on creating mining facilities in the area." Well, it would be cool if there was actually mining facilities that were set up over time and this actually happened. Now, in the early 1.0 days, this could happen via seeking luxuries. I think there was one seeking minerals. So this was actually implemented at one time, and again, because it was abused by us as the quince of its day, where what would happen is we would put a high-tech system into boom, and a lot of times there'd be a seeking luxuries pop up, oftentimes megameters away, and you would just run progenitor cells back and forth and make like 3 million credits a run. You could make crazy amounts of credits back in those days by exploiting this. And instead of it being fixed, they just kind of removed it from the game for a very long period of time. Again, I believe that it still can trigger. I have seen it since then, but it's very, very rare. So keep in mind that this element was kind of there, and they've taken it away, and they've never reworked it back into the game, again, as far as I can tell. We would like to ask any pilots in the area to cooperate with federal forces in their efforts to secure the area and report any illegal mining operations to security forces. Again, my idea here and thinking would have been this was being designed and set up to where you'd go in and scan a target and it would tell you whether or not they had a mining permit. And if they didn't have a mining permit, then security systems would come in and blow them away, or it would issue a bounty and then you could blow them away and take that voucher back and claim it like you would any other criminal. I'm just saying, that sounds like interesting gameplay here. They go on here to say, several prominent pilots have spoken out against the Federation's claim, saying that the resources should be freed for private organizations to mine. Some extremists have threatened to attack federal forces in order to hinder the construction of mining facilities. Again, we don't see mining facilities actually be built into the game as of yet. That being said, in 2.4, at least they were talking about this several months ago, that with the introduction of the first mega ship from Canon being kind of a player group oriented mega ship, that they could now inject points of interest such as stations into the background simulation without having to shut it down and do it during the weekly maintenance, including moving stations. Again, I think Orbis, it's either Orbis or Oculus or Acellus or whatever it is, stations, I think the big giant eyeball stations, are supposed to have the ability to move, such as Jacques Station. And before, in order to move it, they'd have to shut it down, take it out of the database, and then move it in the database by executing commands during that maintenance period. The background sim or other elements just couldn't do it automatically. Apparently, they've now solved this to where they can dynamically move it, and the Canon research ship is going to be movable as 2.4. At least it's supposed to be. Now, I didn't see anything in the betas that indicated whether or not they were actually testing whether this was possible or not. So I think at this point it's still TBD, but could be interesting. Again, if we could see mining facilities being built or extraction facilities being built in these systems over time, would lead to a much more dynamic universe in which it felt like the players were having a sense of urgency. Even if they didn't directly control these facilities, you're causing those facilities to be built due to you and others' actions. Or in the case of here, it would pop up and players could come in and oppose that by killing miners and security forces and stuff like that, and it would lead to these mining construction crews to abandon the project, depending on which side ends up winning out. And you can kind of see this with community goals and the way that they're set up now with exclusivity. But basically what we would be talking about is the trigger of a miniature community goal that would just exist within that system, which I think would have been a much cooler event system than what was delivered, and be something that I hope to see in beyond 2.4. And then they give an example here of economic boom, and this is how it does work, I believe, in the game, that related to trading and other special prices. Yes, if a system is in boom, they're going to offer generally more prices for goods that they import. And again, it required wealth greater than 700, population less than 800. Now, we do have general ideas of where maybe these numbers are based on system population. Again, these events are easier to trigger in a system that has 1,500 people versus 15 billion people. That being said, I would love to know where the current wealth stat is with a line graph over time, or at least a bar graph, if not a numerical at the absolute worst case scenario, a numerical representation. If wealth needs to be above 700, let me know where that wealth number actually is, so I can see what the impact is of my playing versus maybe that of other players, and to see what's going on so you can derive an idea of who's doing what. And the same thing with the population, causes construction of new trading posts. Again, I believe that this did happen at one time with the seeking luxury, seeking minerals, seeking weapons, that those did trigger. But because people found a way to exploit it for obscene amounts of profit into the game, they were then removed, and if they have been reworked into the game as a minor chance of spawning versus what they used to. They buy trade goods, build trade ships, build navy ships, subsidize trade. You know, I don't know if there's any dynamics in there as to whether or not what ships are built at various stations and things of that nature. Again, factory worlds and factories where players' inputs could have an impact on outputs. Again, I've done entire videos over this. I'm not going to rehash that. But, you know, the resolution, the bubble burst, if wealth goes below 800, population exceeds 800. Okay, the boom continues so long as these stats continue to go up, and I think that this is just kind of an error in editing and typing here. Yes, largely this is how things work. But again, if we were given the information and insight into these statistics over time, let's just say a line graph, I think that's the easiest way for most people to be able to digest this information. That would be great. You know, people I think would share a little bit more interest into what's going on in the background sim and stuff of that nature. And they say with notes and issues that complex systems, apology if it is a bit confusing, as it would mean systems are constantly changing and evolving. Changing, yes. I would argue that they aren't necessarily evolving. The counter argument to that is, well, you do have expansion and contraction with minor groups once you trigger an expansion state, ending up going into neighboring systems and expanding via that methodology. which is true. I guess it does kind of evolve a little bit, and you can change government types. You can't really change production types, especially on things like agriculture. You have to have an Earth-like planet in the system, I believe. That's the case in order to trigger that type of system economy. But it would be cool to be a little bit more like, let's say that you're out exploring and you find an Earth-like in an uninhabited system. Well, you could trigger expansion into that system by dropping a nav beacon and setting it up. And then from there, doing missions. And then eventually that triggers a construction ship to arrive, maybe build a settlement somewhere on the planet or the system, and then an outpost, then that eventually outpost grows to a station, things of that nature, things that were proposed earlier. Again, things that even if you don't directly control them, even if it is controlled via this NPC minor faction player group dynamic that they introduced a couple of years ago, I didn't really have a problem with that. I had a problem with the fact that the way that we interact with the background sim, the lack of information that was presented surely at the time, and even the continued lack of information today, meant that you just didn't feel like you had a meaningful impact. If we started to have this information available to us, if it started to lead to things being injected, such as new stations, new points of interest, and things like that, where it feels like we're actually building up that world, that game world, that would bring a sense of agency to the game. We can set down routes by buying hangar space and warehouse space at stations in these systems, and because we are part of that minor faction, let's see if we could pledge to a minor faction instead of power play, and maybe we get a free slot, and then we can buy things. Then maybe I would have more of a stake, or I would get a free hangar space because I'm a member of that faction at some of their stations. That would give me a little bit more of an incentive, I think, to care about what's going on with that minor faction, and again, maybe join with a player group that is supporting that minor faction, or starting my own. I would have a little bit more of enthusiasm in order to do that. And then they're talking about the basic system. Newsfeed and Elite Dangerous displays the latest in-game events to the player. This is usually, I think, Galnet, which is partially automatically generated, procedurally generated, and then also it involves manual entry as well. The problem is you can see that from outside a game by going to the community website and reading the blog. You don't even have to be in the game to see what's going on in meta stories and stuff like that as far as the lore, which is another kind of element of problem. Although you now can get this news feed also from within your ship, anywhere in the universe, even if you're 50,000 light years from the bubble, via going to the powers menu, and the articles are there. And it says events can happen direct player action. Again, this would be things like changing system states, galaxy simulation, which again I think has to do with system states, and then event ejection system. This would be the community goals. Channels. The channels are a presentation layer of the event. Channels are determined news items are displayed, how the news items were reported. I think we have that now with the various newspapers for each one of the minor factions that are in the station screens. Events are data for the news feeds, are score-based and relevant to the player. Score-based on the relevance to the player. I just don't feel that anything affecting them or people on their friends list. I don't think that this is true. You don't get anything in your news feed about what your friends have been doing if they discovered a new planet or something like that. That would be cool, but this doesn't look like it was ever implemented. The player is able to adjust the threshold at which events are shown per category, probably as low, medium, and high. This would be a way to filter events and stuff in the news feed. They have been adding a lot more filters to other aspects of the game, but again, I don't think that this was actually implemented in any way. Player-driven, missions completed. This would be filtered by some value. Major kills. Destroying a highly ranked opponent, human or NPC, would be a newsworthy event. When was the last time you saw that, Commander Harry Potter killed somebody outside of a community kind of event like the whole Salome thing? When was the last time that you saw Mac the Hunter killed a member of the 13th? I've never seen it. It would be kind of interesting. A player death of a highly ranked player would also be a news item. Well, we're to the point where lots of people are, quote, highly ranked players. So, again, some of these elements were just never really incorporated into the new system. Now, some of this information is career events, example, collecting bounties, major trade, exploring a new system. I don't think that that's really given to you. You know, the pop-up whenever you complete a mission, I guess that's what they're talking. Rank increases, prioritizing players known to our player. Again, I think this idea would be that if, like whenever I got to my elite combat status, that your friends would see in their news feed, hey, Schooner Matrix has gotten elite in combat. And then maybe you could, you know, none of that looks like it has ever made it into the game. Again, kind of taking away from the social dynamics of a supposed, quote, MMO, which really, Elite Dangerous, I hate to use that term with it because it's not. Opening discovery a new dark system enabling a new trade route. Well, we don't call them dark systems anymore, just unexplored systems, but again, it doesn't really enable any new trade routes that I've seen. It would be nice if there was a way to enable that. Traffic, this information does tell you. Piracy, it does tell you stats for the number of bounties issued versus those collected. Economy, prices are up, down, surpluses, and shortages. Yes, we do get little factoids in the news feed about this. Stability, crime, and cleanup rates. Yeah, again, go and see the number of bounties issued versus those collected. And political changes to system laws would be a result of a civil war and basically one faction usurping another in terms of the controlling faction. All of that does happen. Injected background simulation, major events, these have their own template. Famine, civil war, what's so civil about civil war anyway? Stability, major military movements or interdiction of a system, new space station or city construction. Again, it looks like this element of gameplay was in the design that has never really been implemented outside of community goals. And very limited in community goals, like the ones that we've had in the prior month as of the recording of this video. Channels will lead us to create news feeds specific to a player's interest as well as more general. Imperial Times, FNN. None of this exists. The idea that you would subscribe to the Imperial Times and that would be an in-lore newspaper in the feed for the Empire. Or FNN, the Federal News Network. Fake news network. They would have their own fake news network. Fake news. Bigly. That would be a bigly improvement if this is how it worked. The Daily Hunter, bounty hunter related news. This would be awesome if there was actual channels. This sort of kind of exists when you go into a system, and again, each minor faction has its own newspaper, essentially, that you can read that has been generated and added into the game over time. But it's not like you can choose in which news feeds you want to gain and that all of these sources exist in the game. This would be for a little bit more vibrant, lore-rich universe, but it's not. Accessing the news feed from the player's cockpit. There's a direct interface that is part of the tertiary screens, as well as hooked via the galaxy maps for accessing news feeds for different systems. Again, in the power play menu, you can access the main overall branching news feed, Galnet. But as far as in-system feeds and stuff like that goes, you have to dock at a station. I don't believe that you can read these news feed information from the galaxy menu or the map. That would be kind of interesting. Again, I think that you would have to scan a beacon or something in order to get that example. And again, we have this with the Daily Lave. Pirates Ministry strikes a blow. Okay. Redbeard taken down. Another pirate bites at the dust. Players have control of details. Not really. It says to show headlines or more detail. This is, I guess we do have that control because we can click on a headline and then pull it up and it'll bring out the full text of the article. Adverts. Authored. And this was supposed to happen. Ironically, this happens out of game as far as Radio Sidewinder goes. Then we have procedural template adverts. And you kind of see this with Sod Kruger ads as you go into stations and stuff like that. Then we get into the Sidewinder and how all of the ship systems and stuff work. And that's where we're going to end the series, because now we're talking about how ships work and all of the impact of systems and stuff there. And pretty much all of this has all been implemented into the game. So, kind of the conclusions here for this video, even though this is the longest, of course it is the last one of the batch. My takeaways are this. The game that has been proposed with a lot of the elements like station construction, mining bases being built and stuff like that, driven by player interactions with the background simulation, and also presenting that information via news feeds, via charts and stuff like that, maybe charts integrated in the news feed. That would be awesome. Hey, the Lave Liberals have the Lave Liberals daily, or Daily Lave. I think that was one of the newspapers there that they had shown up. You know, this pirate has taken down and has led to an increase in piracy in general. And then in the middle of that article, there's the line graph that shows how much piracy and how lower the security status for that system has been driven over the course of the past 72 hours, let's just say, in form of a line graph. That would be absolutely awesome way to combine useful flow of information of what's going on with the background sim in a narrative text-based form that would be like reading a newspaper article in the Wall Street Journal or The Economist, as far as a magazine goes. And then again, maybe you could have newspapers that generate this every tick or every meta tick, or I should say every data tick, and then you have your weekly magazines that would happen at the end of each one of the quote meta ticks, which is the daily or the weekly maintenance cycle, and would come up with information that's going on where, hey, due to this week's activities in this system, it's leading to construction crews to begin delivering a new station or begin constructing a new station. There are ways that you could pull this together to form a more cohesive narrative structure, and I think that a lot of the elements are there to do it. It just needs to be refined a few extra steps. Hopefully, again, past 2.4, I hope that they're going to address some of this come the Frontier Expo. It's also given me the idea to do a couple of more short-form videos. I know some people on the channel don't like those, about Beyond 2.4 and how this should be conducted. So, thank you very much for putting up with this series of videos, but I thought it was important to go back and take a look at how Elite Dangerous was proposed to the community during the Kickstarter and development phases, and what's been delivered over the course of the past 3 years. Now, they tout a 10-year development cycle and things like that to where not everything was going to be there at the beginning, and they would gradually work towards this. The problem with them being so tight-lipped about what they are and are not working on means that we have no idea if this is the game that they're going to be, that they envisioned is going to be the one that ends up getting built. And of course, they have taken player feedback into account with some of the adjustments to some of the systems and game design elements, which I don't really have necessarily a problem with that. I think that that is relatively healthy and good to do, but they need to let the lips get a little bit looser here and start to let players know that this is the direction they're going to be going, it is not the direction they're going to be going, and why. And like it is with offline and Iron Man mode, if they just said, look, we've changed our mind about offline mode and that everybody's going to inhabit the same galaxy and it needs to be online all the time, okay, so be it. The fact that Iron Man mode was removed because we ran out of time and essentially time budget in order to do so, okay, that's fine. Tell me so. It's a little bit disappointing, but at the same time, if you come out and honest and tell us what's going on, I think there's a lot more understanding that could be had. I've often compared this to the other project, Star Citizen. At times, Star Citizen has said too much, and Chris Roberts doesn't know how to say the word no, and this was even a problem during the first year that I was following that project, and every 10 for the chairman was essentially yes, 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 yes. Okay, this is completely absurd, so no. But he didn't seem to be able to tell people that, yeah, this game is going to be the game of your dreams. So long as you can dream it, yes, we will build it. Instead of taking kind of the David Braben approach of, well, that's a neat idea, but no promises or guarantees, or that's not on the design horizon. Frontier will at least say no. I will give them that, even if it is at times disappointing. But I wish they would be a little bit more open about the development roadmap. I hope we can see that in the Frontier Expo in the next week. Look for videos on that. Now, I do have something going on that day, so it is unlikely that I will be doing any videos over the Frontier Expo and what comes out until at least Saturday night, probably Sunday, maybe even Monday before I get around to digesting and putting any videos up on that. That's just kind of the nature of the beast. And again, thank you very much for watching, as this video is almost 40 minutes long, and bearing with me. Be sure to like, subscribe, and share. And I probably will be posting this entire series of videos in a playlist to Reddit in the next couple of days. Although it'll probably be busy with 2.4 posts, so maybe I'll wait until after the Frontier Expo to do this. This is, of course, unless somebody else, Allo, puts up this video and decides to share it on their own. No objections to that either, or on the forums or other discords, what have you. I appreciate it. I appreciate your comments down below, even if I don't or others don't necessarily always agree. I think that it is kind of interesting because it's one of those things. Where do you want to see the game go? And I think that there's going to be more poignant discussions about this after the release of 2.4 and after the Frontier Expo, in which they start to lay out the roadmap for the future. And they need to do that. Players need to know where things are going. If they're talking about integrating and changing up gameplay to include many of these features over the course of the next year, maybe year and a half, I think I'll take a much more cautious, we'll wait and see. If they add these gameplay elements into the game and change the way that maybe power play, I would hope that they would just remove power play at this point and replace it with pledging with a minor faction. I think that would solve a lot of the lack of agency in the game. We can debate over specific mechanics, not going to please everyone, but I could be a lot more flexible than I was about some of these topics even a couple of years ago, so I've sat down and, again, had extensive time to think about it. So, thank you very much, and I will see you next time. Be sure to like, subscribe, follow, and all that fun stuff. Till then, see you next time.